April 8th, 1943, 27,000 feet above occupied France. The sky was a cruel silver ocean, thin, cold, and endless. A German ace, Oberleutnant Ralph Herrmann, squinted through the frosted canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A, lips curling beneath his oxygen mask. Below, 16 hulking silhouettes lumbered upward through the clouds, Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, the newest American fighters making their first appearance over Europe. Herrmann's laughter crackled through the radio. "The Americans have sent us flying milk bottles," he said to his wingman, his voice half amusement, half disbelief. The other pilot chuckled, tightening formation as the metallic shapes below struggled to climb. Against the elegant German fighters, sleek, sharp, perfectly balanced, the Thunderbolts looked absurd. Barrel-bodied, broad-winged, propellers spinning like overworked fans, they seemed less like machines of war and more like awkward mistakes of engineering. But as Herrmann banked his fighter and prepared to dive, a strange thought crept into his mind. Those massive American planes didn't seem to care. They climbed steadily, heavily, relentlessly, like something that refused to be mocked. They were slow, yes, but certain, solid, unflinching. What none of the German pilots circling that morning could possibly know was that this laughter, the smug certainty that they owned the sky, was the sound of their future collapsing. Within 18 months, those same milk bottles would become the most feared machines in the European theater. Pilots who mocked them would whisper their name like a curse. At that moment, though, all the Germans saw were targets, slow, bloated, easy prey. Herrmann leveled his aircraft, rolled inverted, and plunged toward the formation. Wind screamed over his canopy as his Focke-Wulf picked up speed. Below him, sunlight glinted off American aluminum, bright, clean, and somehow defiant. His wingman shouted over the radio, "They don't even scatter." "Good," Herrmann replied. "That will make them easier to kill." He fired. Cannon shells streaked through the air, cutting past the rising Thunderbolts. The first explosions tore chunks of metal from the sky, and for a moment it seemed the Germans were right. This new American fighter was no match for the Luftwaffe. But something about the way the rest of them kept coming unbroken, steady, swallowing altitude felt different. Even damaged, they didn't break formation. And far below, hidden behind the roar of engines and gunfire, history was already turning. Those German pilots couldn't know they were witnessing the birth of the aircraft that would rewrite the mathematics of air combat. A machine that would outlast, outgun, and outclimb everything thrown against it. The laughter of April 8th would echo into silence, replaced by a new sound, the deep, terrifying thunder of 8 synchronized Browning machine guns cutting through the air. This is not the story of a single aircraft. It's the story of how American industrial genius turned ridicule into dominance, how engineers and farm boys together forged a flying fortress so powerful that even mockery became fear. It's the story of the plane that began as a joke and ended as judgment. It's the story of the P-47 Thunderbolt, the monster that shattered the sky, June 1940. The world was burning. France had fallen, Britain stood alone, and the United States, still months away from Pearl Harbor, watched in anxious silence. Inside a cluttered workshop at Republic Aviation on Long Island, a heavy-set Georgian engineer named Alexander Kartveli unfolded a sheet of paper that would change air warfare forever. The Army Air Corps had sent impossible requirements, a single-engine fighter that could climb higher, fly faster, and hit harder than anything in the sky. Kartveli studied the list, sighed, and told his team, "They want a miracle." Then he added something quietly, the kind of sentence that marks the start of history. "We'll build them a monster." Kartveli didn't care about beauty, he cared about survival. His design defied every instinct of aerodynamics, big, heavy, armored to the bones, and powered by a massive radial engine that would make mechanics curse and pilots sweat. When a colleague joked that it looked like a flying barrel, Kartveli didn't flinch. "It will be a dinosaur," he said, "but a dinosaur with good proportions." The prototype, the XP-47B, rolled out under a grey May sky in 1941. Test pilots stared at it in disbelief. At 9,900 pounds empty, it was nearly twice as heavy as most fighters of the time. Its turbo-supercharger, an enormous mechanical lung running through the rear fuselage, made it look pregnant. The landing gear seemed too tall, the wings too stubby, the cockpit absurdly roomy. "This thing actually flies?" a pilot muttered. Then they fired up the engine. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp roared to life, shaking the ground. It was an 18-cylinder powerhouse producing 2,000 horsepower, a mechanical hurricane wrapped in steel. When the test pilot released the brakes, the aircraft lurched forward like an angry bull breaking free of its pen. It wasn't graceful, but it was alive. At altitude, the world changed. While other fighters gasped for air, the P-47's turbo-supercharger fed its engine with oxygen-rich breath, maintaining sea-level power even at 27,000 feet. Above the clouds, the sky became its element. For the first time, Kartveli's monster showed what it was meant to be. Not a dancer, but a hammer. Yet even as engineers celebrated the breakthrough, the army had doubts. They wanted agility, not armor. Speed, not size. The brass didn't see a fighter, they saw an overweight experiment. "It's too big," one general said. "It'll never turn with a Messerschmitt." Kartveli smiled faintly and replied, "It won't have to." The logic was simple but revolutionary. If you can't outturn the enemy, outlast him. If you can't outclimb him, outgun him. Let physics do what fear cannot. The United States didn't yet realize it, but that was the blueprint for victory, not just in the air, but in the entire war. Bridgeport, Connecticut, autumn 1942. The war machine was roaring to life across America, but at the edge of an airfield in Connecticut, mechanics and pilots gathered around the wreckage of yet another P-47. Smoke curled from the twisted metal, the smell of burnt oil and cordite lingering in the wind. Inside the cockpit, the controls were jammed, the seat frame crushed. The Republic P-47 was already earning a reputation just not the kind anyone wanted. Pilots called it the Widowmaker. It was killing more Americans in training than Germans ever would in combat. Major Hubert Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, watched a crane lift another mangled fuselage from the runway. His men stood in silence. Between September 1942 and January 1943, 18 pilots were dead, 41 Thunderbolts destroyed before a single one met the enemy. Zemke rubbed his temples and muttered, "She's got power, all right, but she's trying to murder us." The problem wasn't courage, it was physics. The massive engine produced brutal torque, throttled too quickly, and the plane would roll upside down before you even realized what had happened. Land too fast, and the high landing gear collapsed like matchsticks, dive too steeply, and the controls froze solid as shockwaves wrapped the wings in invisible fists. Pilots learned the hard way what the engineers hadn't yet taught them, that the P-47 was a creature of extremes. It demanded precision, patience, and a level of respect bordering on fear. One trainee, a 20-year-old farm boy from Oklahoma named Robert Johnson, stood by the runway, watching the smoking remains of his friend's aircraft. He whispered, "If this thing doesn't kill me first, I'll learn to fly it." Weeks later, Johnson got his chance. On his first solo flight, he throttled forward, the Pratt & Whitney roaring like a beast unchained. The plane surged down the runway, shuddering, heavy, alive. When the wheels lifted, he felt the entire weight of the machine pulling against him. Every vibration, every groan from the frame told him what the instructors had said. This wasn't a plane you flew, it was a plane you wrestled. At 10,000 feet, Johnson leveled off, heart pounding. For a moment, the P-47 steadied, its massive wings slicing through sunlight. He eased the stick, and the machine responded not delicately, but decisively. It didn't dance, it commanded. He landed that day drenched in sweat, but alive. He walked away, grinning. "It's not a killer," he said quietly. "It just wants to see if you deserve it." Slowly, word spread among pilots. Those who survived the P-47's temper discovered its secret. Beneath the danger was dependability. Under the violence was strength. The aircraft that broke the careless rewarded the disciplined. Zemke began to notice a pattern. The ones who mastered her didn't just survive, they thrived. "It's like a wild horse," he told his men. "If you hang on, she'll carry you through hell." By early 1943, a handful of pilots had tamed the monster. They didn't know it yet, but these few would soon face the Luftwaffe and prove that Kartvel's flying dinosaur could not only fight but dominate. April 8th, 1943, the same day, Ralph Hermchen laughed over France. At an airbase in southern England, engines thundered across the tarmac as the 4th Fighter Group prepared for its first real combat mission. 16 P-47 Thunderbolts gleamed under a pale spring sun, each carrying 3,400 rounds of ammunition and the nervous hopes of pilots who had never seen a German fighter up close. Major Don Blakesley, a veteran who had once flown sleek Spitfires for the RAF, walked the line of aircraft with calm authority. He knew what his men didn't, that survival in the P-47 would require unlearning everything they thought they knew about air combat. "Forget what the Brits taught you," he said over the radio. "You can't dance with these birds. You hit, you run, you live." The formation lifted from the runway and climbed toward France, the rising hum of engines blending into a single metallic growl. Inside the cockpits, young American pilots tightened their gloves and adjusted their oxygen masks. They were rookies, flying a machine everyone said couldn't win. Above them, waiting like wolves, were the hunters of Jagdgeschwader, 26 Germany's most experienced fighter wing, men who had fought over Poland, France, Britain, and Russia, men who considered themselves the masters of the sky. At 27,000 feet, the two worlds met. The Germans pounced first. Focke-Wulfs rolled from the sun, cannon fire tracing white arcs through the thin air. Explosions tore across. The formation. One Thunderbolt vanished in a bloom of flame, another spiraled downward, trailing smoke like a dying comet. In the radio chaos, someone shouted, "They're all over us." Blakesley's voice cut through the panic. "Stay tight, don't turn with them." But instinct won out. A few American pilots, trained on lighter aircraft, tried to fight back in tight turns, a fatal mistake. The Thunderbolt's massive frame resisted, groaning, losing altitude. German pilots darted around them like sharks, scoring hit after hit. When it was over, 14 American fighters were gone. Only 3 confirmed kills in return. Back at base, the silence was heavy. Mechanics stared at the bullet-riddled survivors rolling to a stop, their wings shredded, fuselages peppered with holes. One ground crewman whispered, "How did they even make it back?" The British observers weren't kind. Spitfire veterans smirked and said, "The Yanks brought a flying brick to a knife fight." But hidden in the wreckage was something no one yet understood. The P-47 seconds that returned had taken punishment. No Spitfire or Messerschmitt could have survived. Holes the size of fists scarred their wings. Hydraulic fluid poured from ruptured lines. Engines coughed black smoke, yet they had flown home. In the mess hall that night, Blakesley raised a cup of coffee and said quietly, "They think we're the joke. Let them." A pause. The men waited. Because jokes don't bleed and keep flying. They didn't know it yet, but the humiliation of that first battle would be the crucible that hardened them. The Germans believed the Thunderbolt was meat for the slaughter. They had no idea that beneath its clumsy skin lay the anatomy of their destruction. June 26th, 1943, over Le Mans, France. The sun burned pale and cold above the clouds. 48 Thunderbolts from the 56th Fighter Group were escorting bombers home, their formations tight and steady. In the rear of the group flew Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, the same Oklahoma farm boy who once vowed to tame the monster. He'd already seen his share of chaos. The air war over France was merciless, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to happen. Without warning, 16 Focke-Wulf 190 seconds appeared from the sun, sleek, fast, and furious. They were led by Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, the younger brother of Adolf Galland, Germany's most famous ace. The German fighters dove like hawks, cannon fire flashing from their wings. The sky erupted. Johnson's Thunderbolt shook violently as shells exploded across its frame. Glass shattered, metal tore. Hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit, coating his face. A cannon round ripped open the cowling. Another detonated near the canopy, welding it shut. His leg was bleeding, his nose was cut, and fire burned somewhere behind the instrument panel. He tried to eject, but the canopy wouldn't budge. Trapped, the engine sputtered, coughing smoke, and the aircraft began to drop. The controls barely responded. Through the oil-smeared windscreen, Johnson could see the French countryside spinning below him like a map of doom. Then, instinct, training, desperation. He slammed the throttle forward, fighting the stick with both hands. The P-47 groaned, trembling, but leveled out. The fire died down. The engine coughed again, then steadied, a ragged heartbeat refusing to quit. He was alive. Barely. Johnson turned toward England, 200 miles away. He didn't know if he'd make it, but there was nowhere else to go. That's when the shadow appeared beside him, a lone Focke-Wulf, its guns still smoking. The German pilot slid into position behind the crippled Thunderbolt. Johnson braced himself. The cannon roared. 4 20mm guns and 2 machine guns tore into the P-47. Metal screamed, glass shattered anew, pieces of the fuselage ripped free. Still, the Thunderbolt flew. The German repositioned and fired again. Same result, smoke and fire, but no explosion. Johnson was trapped inside a flying corpse that refused to die. He ducked behind the armor plate, praying. Finally, the firing stopped. Johnson looked over, and through the cracked canopy, he saw the German pilot's face. Young, blonde, eyes wide with disbelief. The German eased up alongside the Thunderbolt, studying it as if seeing a ghost. Then, almost gently, he saluted one pilot to another and peeled away, out of ammunition, out of answers. Johnson's P-47 limped across the channel, smoke trailing like a black comet. He landed at Manston, skidding to a halt as the engine died with a final metallic groan. Ground crews swarmed the wreck, stunned. They stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. One shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. Another had torn through the control cables. The entire rear fuselage was nearly severed. Yet the plane had flown. When engineers examined the damage, they realized what they were dealing with. This wasn't just a fighter, it was an airborne fortress. Its rugged radial engine, thick armor plating, and redundant systems had made it almost indestructible. German intelligence received reports of the encounter from their own pilots. They refused to believe them. No aircraft could survive that, they wrote. But it had. Johnson's Thunderbolt became legend. In mess halls across England, pilots whispered the story, the plane that couldn't die, the monster that brought its pilot home through hell. From that day, something shifted. Doubt turned to belief. Fear turned to respect. The P-47 was no longer a joke, it was a warning. And for the Luftwaffe, that warning would soon become prophecy. By July 1943, the laughter had stopped. Major Hubert Zemke, now commanding the 56th Fighter Group in England, gathered his pilots in a smoke-filled briefing room. The air reeked of coffee, oil, and adrenaline. On the chalkboard behind him were 3 words written in bold white letters. Don't turn. Dive. He tapped the board with his pointer. You don't fight the Germans their way, he said. You fight them the Thunderbolts' way. The pilots nodded, some with the half-grin of disbelief, others with the look of men who had seen what happened to those who didn't listen. Zemke had discovered the secret through brutal trial and error. The Thunderbolt wasn't a dogfighter, it was a battering ram. In the hands of a patient pilot, it could use its weight like a weapon. At 14,000 pounds fully loaded, the P-47 was the heaviest single-engine fighter in the sky. That weight, when thrown into a dive, made it unstoppable. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could drop like a falling star, faster than any German plane could follow. At the bottom of the dive, 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns unleashed 6,000 rounds per minute. Each bullet, half an inch thick and traveling nearly 3,000 feet per second, carried the energy of a small artillery shell. German pilots who survived those attacks said it felt like flying into a wall of lead. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin was among the first to master the tactic. He called it boom and zoom. You climbed high, stayed silent, waited for the perfect moment, then dropped an avalanche of speed and fury. Don't chase, Zemke reminded his men. Hit them once, hard, and get out. And it worked. During one patrol in August 1943, Mahurin spotted a group of Fokker Wolfs lining up to intercept bombers. He rolled inverted, dove from 30,000 feet, and opened fire at 400 yards. The first German plane disintegrated instantly. The second caught fire. The third tried to roll away, but was torn apart before it could complete the turn. The entire attack lasted less than 10 seconds. Back on the ground, Mahurin simply said, "That's how you do it." The P-47 had found its rhythm brute force made beautiful through discipline. It couldn't twist and turn like a Spitfire, but it didn't need to. Its job was to strike with overwhelming violence and vanish into the clouds before the enemy could blink. And when the Germans tried to follow, they learned the second rule of Thunderbolt combat: you can't catch what falls faster than gravity. At terminal velocity, a diving P-47 reached speeds over 550 miles per hour, faster than any aircraft in the Luftwaffe's inventory. German fighters that tried to pursue often found their controls locking up in compressibility, the same deadly phenomenon that froze ailerons and snapped wings. Pilots began to realize they were flying not just an airplane, but a law of physics with a cockpit. Each dive became an act of vengeance. Every trigger pull a thunderclap. And as their confidence grew, so did their legend. Across Europe, German pilots started giving the Thunderbolt a new name, Der Donnerkeil, the Thunderbolt strike. Zemke's words became gospel in every squadron briefing. Use your weight, use your power, use your guns. The American air war had just changed its rules, and for the Luftwaffe, the learning curve would be fatal. The smell of oil and steel filled the air at Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant on Long Island. The year was 1944. And the war had transformed the quiet factory into an unbroken thunder of production. Sparks flew from welding torches, rivet guns hammered metal skins into place, and engines roared to life as test stands trembled under the weight of power. On every wall hung a sign that summed up the spirit of the place: one Thunderbolt every hour, and they meant it. Day and night, 7 days a week, shifts of men and women, many who had never seen an airplane before, the war worked side by side. Housewives, machinists, mechanics, immigrants, each played their part in a symphony of precision. Every rivet, every wire, every bullet was a note in the vast industrial song of victory. Each Thunderbolt required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, 300 pounds of rubber. The Pratt & Whitney double wasp engine alone contained 2,400 parts machined to microscopic tolerances. And yet, through sheer coordination and discipline, one rolled out the door every 60 minutes. Across the country, another factory in Evansville, Indiana, once farmland, was doing the same. By 1944, they were producing over 500 Thunderbolts a month. While German factories struggled under bombings, shortages, and slave labor, America was running a 24-hour rhythm of abundance. They didn't just build planes, they built momentum. The numbers became their own kind of weapon. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 Thunderbolts during the war, more than any other American fighter. The scale was staggering. By the time the Luftwaffe shot down one, 5 more were already on their way to England. And the ammunition? Factories like Lake City Arsenal in Missouri churned out over 30 million rounds a month. Each cartridge measured to the 10,000th of an inch. Each belt of bullets a perfectly calibrated promise of destruction. War had become arithmetic, and in that arithmetic, America held every advantage. While German mechanics hand-fitted engines by lamplight, American factories assembled thousands with identical precision. While the Luftwaffe rationed fuel, America shipped tankers of aviation gasoline across the Atlantic every day. It wasn't just machines that won the war, it was the machine that built the machines. The P-47 wasn't designed to be delicate or beautiful, it was built to survive mass production. Its panels could be replaced with wrenches and sweat. Its engines could be swapped in hours. It was a warrior that could be resurrected daily. A British officer visiting Farmingdale once stood silent, watching the endless rows of fuselages. Finally, he said, "This isn't an assembly line, it's an avalanche." He was right. Every bolt that clicked into place in New York or Indiana meant another pilot had a chance to come home. Every cartridge pressed into a belt meant another mission that wouldn't fail for lack of fire. The Germans had skill, the Americans had systems, and systems don't tire. Systems don't run out of courage. Each hour, another Thunderbolt rolled out of its hangar, metal wings gleaming under the factory lights, ready to thunder across the Atlantic. It was no longer just a fighter plane. It was a symbol of inevitability. February 1944. The English countryside was cold and grey, its airfields slick with rain and exhaust. Inside the hangars, the latest variant of the Thunderbolt gleamed like polished muscle, the P-47D-22, fitted with a new Hamilton Standard paddle blade propeller nearly 13 feet across. It looked absurdly large, but when the first engines roared to life, mechanics stopped talking. The deep, guttural thunder that rolled across the field was unlike anything they'd heard before. It didn't hum or whine, it shook the earth. Pilots soon discovered what that new sound meant in the sky. The paddle blades bit into the air with astonishing force. Climb rates that had once been sluggish now soared. Acceleration leapt forward like a punch from a heavyweight. The same aircraft that once labored upward like a truck could now chase the Luftwaffe through the clouds. When the throttle opened, the propeller tips reached near supersonic speeds, leaving a distinctive roar that echoed for miles. To German ground troops, it became an omen, a low, rolling rumble that meant death was on its way. They called it Donnerschlag, the thunderclap. Oberleutnant Heinz Noack, a veteran of over 200 missions, wrote in his diary after a February encounter near Hanover, "We bounced them, expecting the usual advantage. But they turned into us and climbed. Schmidt tried to break off, but they followed us up to 30,000 feet. His aircraft exploded mid-air. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The laughter was gone now, replaced by disbelief. Even their sound had changed the battlefield. German soldiers could identify the Thunderbolt long before they saw it, that deep, hammering rhythm of the paddle blades cutting the air. It was said that the first note of that rumble froze men where they stood. To the Allies, that same sound became comfort. To the Germans, it became prophecy. The Thunderbolt had evolved from awkward brute to apex predator. It could now meet the enemy head-on faster, higher, and deadlier than ever before. And with the invasion of France looming, that new thunder would soon roll across the continent, louder, closer, and unstoppable. June 1944. The morning sky over Normandy was pale gold, streaked with smoke and tracer fire. The invasion of Europe had begun, and above the beaches roared more than 500 Thunderbolts, flying fortresses of steel and fury. German troops on the ground looked up and froze. The sound came first, a deep, rolling growl that thickened in the chest before it reached the ears. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of a Spitfire or the hiss of a Messerschmitt. It was a hammer made of air, striking from the heavens again and again. They called it Donnerschlag, the thunderclap, and they learned to fear it long before they saw it. The Thunderbolts flew in layers from sea level to 30,000 feet, creating what one German pilot later described as a sky made of death. Every approach path, every climb angle, every escape route was blocked by American metal. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer, one of only 3 Luftwaffe pilots who managed to reach the beaches that morning, remembered, "We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our group took off. I was the only one to return. They were waiting for us everywhere. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. Below, the German ground columns fared no better. Convoys moving toward the front were spotted from miles away. The Thunderbolts came in low, so low you could see the pilot's goggles, the flash of sunlight on his helmet. Then came the shriek of rockets, the hiss of bombs, and the hammering roar of 8 machine guns. In seconds, a line of trucks vanished into a wall of fire. Tanks were flipped like toys. Horses bolted, screaming. Survivors called it the apocalypse at eye level. Colonel Hans von Luck, commanding a Panzer Grenadier regiment, later said, "They came in pairs, always from the sun. One attack, maybe 3 seconds, and 20 vehicles were gone. You could do nothing, just pray." The Luftwaffe called them Jabo's fighter bombers, but even that term felt too small. These weren't raiders, they were executioners. The pilots called their strafing runs, raking the ground. Each pass poured hundreds of rounds of armor-piercing incendiaries into columns of trucks, trains, and armor. By nightfall, 9th Air Force, Thunderbolts had destroyed over 600 locomotives, nearly 4,000 trucks, and 500 tanks in a single month. The German army learned to move only under darkness. By day, movement meant death. Then something even stranger began happening among Luftwaffe pilots. Medical officers called it Jabo fever. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and hurricanes without flinching now broke into sweats when the word Thunderbolt came over the radio. Heart rates spiked, hands shook. Some pilots refused to fly daylight missions altogether. The fear wasn't just of the aircraft, it was of inevitability. The P-47 had become an unstoppable law of the battlefield, and its legend spread beyond the front lines. German civilians whispered about the planes that destroyed entire columns in minutes. Soldiers compared the sound of its guns to tearing silk and thunder rolled into one. The laughter of 1943 was gone, replaced by silence and superstition. The mere echo of that thunder made men dive for cover. The sky no longer belonged to Germany, it belonged to the storm they had once mocked. By the spring of 1945, the war in the air was no longer a contest, it was a reckoning. Germany still had brave pilots, but bravery couldn't outfly exhaustion, and courage couldn't outproduce industry. The Luftwaffe's airfields were craters, their hangars in ruins, their fuel reserves nearly gone. Even their finest pilots were being sent up in aircraft held together with tape and prayer. Meanwhile, across the Channel, the thunder never stopped. Farmingdale, Evansville, Buffalo American factories were churning out P-47 seconds faster than the Luftwaffe could shoot them down. When one squadron lost 10 planes in a day, replacements arrived within 48 hours. Major George Brooking said it best after the New Year's Day raid at Metz, when German pilots destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground. A captured officer sneered, "What do you think of that?" Brooking pointed at the crews already clearing debris and replied, "By tomorrow we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" There was no answer. Because the war had changed its arithmetic. Germany still measured strength in aces. America measured it in output. Republic Aviation built over 15,600 Thunderbolts before the war ended, one every hour, every day, for years. Behind each aircraft stood a workforce of ordinary people who had never worn uniforms but fought just as hard. Welders, riveters, factory women with bandanas and blistered hands. They didn't carry rifles, they carried torque wrenches, and their weapon was abundance. The Thunderbolt embodied everything the American war machine had become: brutal, methodical, unstoppable. It didn't win through elegance, it won through endurance. When one engine failed, 10 more roared to life. When one pilot fell, another climbed into a cockpit, already waiting for him. By the time Allied forces crossed the Rhine, the Luftwaffe was a shadow. Outnumbered, outclimbed, and outgunned, German pilots flew into battle, knowing they would not return. Many never even saw the enemy who killed them, just a flash of silver above the clouds, and then the sound of thunder. Captured German reports told the story best. In 1943, large, unmaneuverable, minimal threat. In 1944, critical danger at high altitude. By March 1945, unsurvivable in direct engagement. Adolf Galland, the Luftwaffe's own fighter chief, admitted after the war, "We built aircraft for artists. They built aircraft for factories, and factories do not lose wars." The Thunderbolt had become the physical expression of that truth. Its wings carried not just machine guns and bombs, but the weight of a nation's belief that strength could be engineered, mass-produced, and multiplied until resistance was impossible. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the once mocked flying milk bottle stood as the most feared machine in the European sky. From Normandy to the Rhine, from the hedgerows to Berlin, the thunder had spoken. And long after the smoke cleared, veterans on both sides remembered that sound, the deep, rolling growl that started as a whisper of propellers and ended as a storm that could level armies. It was the sound of industry, the sound of inevitability, the sound of a world remade by men who refused to quit. So the next time you hear the name Thunderbolt, remember, it wasn't just a plane. It was the roar of an idea that courage means nothing without endurance, and that endurance, when powered by purpose, can shake the world itself. If you enjoyed this story, don't let it fade into silence. Subscribe to the channel, join us as we uncover more forgotten legends of World War II machines, men, and moments that changed history forever. because the thunder may have ended, but its echoes still fly.